Welcome back to today's deep dive story. This is not just history, this is one of America's most forbidden and rarely discussed hidden narratives. The slave named Jabari Mansa is a story buried under silence, power, and fear, yet built on real traces, oral accounts, and historical clues that took serious time and effort to research and verify. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you value stories that dig beyond surface level history and rely on true data finding, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what mainstream narratives leave out. Jabari Mansa is a name that does not appear in standard American history books, yet fragments of his identity surface through oral traditions, scattered plantation records, and suppressed colonial accounts. The absence of official documentation is not accidental. During the early formation of American slave records, individuals considered dangerous due to intelligence, leadership, or symbolic power were often renamed, mislabeled, or erased entirely. Jabari Mansa's identity survives not through clean paperwork, but through whispers passed down generations. The name itself raises immediate questions. Jabari means brave or fearless in Swahili, while Mansa was a royal title used by West African kings, most famously Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire. Enslaved Africans were rarely allowed to keep names tied to royalty or authority. The continued association of this name suggests that Jabari either claimed it defiantly or others recognized something exceptional about him, something threatening enough to be hidden. Accounts describe Jabari Mansa as a man of unusual composure and intellect, fluent in multiple languages and possessing knowledge far beyond what slaveholders expected. Such traits often led to harsh surveillance or deliberate historical erasure. Instead of being recorded as a leader, he was reduced to property, his true identity stripped from official memory to prevent inspiration or rebellion among others. What makes Jabari Mansa truly mysterious is not only who he was, but why so much effort was made to ensure we would never know him. History remembers what power allows it to remember, and Jabari Mansa appears to be someone history was afraid to keep alive. The origins of Jabari Mansa's enslavement are as obscured as his name, but the fragments that remain point to a truth far more unsettling than ordinary capture. Oral histories from West Africa speak of noble bloodlines deliberately targeted during the height of the transatlantic slave trade. European traders and local collaborators knew that removing princes, scholars, and heirs was the fastest way to collapse resistance. Jabari Mansa is believed to have been taken during one such calculated purge, not as random cargo, but as a strategic prize. The title Mansa was never given lightly. It was reserved for rulers, governors, or those directly tied to royal courts of powerful empires like Mali or Songhai. If Jabari carried this title before captivity, it suggests he belonged to a lineage trained in leadership, law, economics, and diplomacy. That background would explain later accounts of his calm authority, his ability to organize quietly, and his deep understanding of systems of power, even while enslaved. Upon arrival in the Americas, any trace of royal identity would have been considered dangerous. Slaveholders feared educated Africans more than physical strength, because knowledge spreads. As a result, Jabari's origins were likely deliberately severed, family ties erased, birthplace altered, and status reduced to a nameless entry in plantation ledgers. This was not just enslavement of the body, but execution of legacy. What makes this loss tragic is not only that Jabari Mansa was stripped of freedom, but that America may have been built using the stolen intellect of someone groomed to rule. While denying him even the right to be remembered, his royal lineage did not disappear. It was buried, because remembering it would force history to admit what it stole. The word, Mansa, is not a surname, nor a casual name. It is a title of supreme authority. In West African history, Mansa meant king, emperor, or ruler of rulers. It signified command over land, people, trade routes, and law. The most famous bearer, Mansa Musa, was so powerful and wealthy that his presence reshaped global economies. To carry this title was to be recognized as part of a governing elite trained from youth to lead, negotiate, and preserve order. During the era of slavery, names were the first thing taken. Enslaved Africans were renamed to strip them of identity, lineage, and memory. Any name that hinted at power, royalty, or divine authority was considered dangerous. This makes the survival of the title Mansa alongside Jabari's name deeply unsettling. It suggests resistance, not just physical, but intellectual. Either Jabari refused to surrender the title, or others continued to recognize it in secret, preserving its meaning despite punishment. Slaveholders understood the psychological power of names. A man called Mansa could never be fully broken, because the name itself reminded others that kings were walking among the enslaved. This is likely why official records avoided it, replacing it with numbers, nicknames, or generic labels. The title survived only in whispered memory, passed down quietly to avoid retaliation. The meaning behind Mansa transforms Jabari from a forgotten slave into a symbol of stolen sovereignty. It challenges the narrative that enslaved Africans were powerless or uncivilized. Instead, it reveals a truth history tried to bury. Some of those in chains were not only leaders, but were born to rule. One of the most telling aspects of Jabari Mansa's story is not what we know, but what is missing. In American slave history, gaps in records are rarely accidental. Plantation ledgers were obsessively detailed when it came to property, labor output, and punishment. Yet individuals who showed leadership, intelligence, or the ability to influence others often appear blurred, renamed repeatedly, or vanish entirely from documentation. Jabari Mansa fits this pattern of deliberate erasure. Historians have long acknowledged that slave owners manipulated records to maintain control. Names were changed, ages altered, origins mislabeled, and skills understated. Educated Africans were often recorded simply as field hands to conceal their true capabilities. In cases where an enslaved person became too influential, the solution was simple: remove the paper trail. Jabari's disappearance from formal archives suggests fear, not oversight. What survives instead are indirect traces, sudden gaps in ownership logs, unexplained transfers between plantations, and oral accounts that speak of a man who knew too much or spoke like a ruler. These fragments point to intentional suppression. Writing Jabari Mansa into history would have forced acknowledgement that slavery did not only exploit bodies, it imprisoned minds trained for governance. Diplomacy and leadership. Erased documentation is itself evidence. Silence can be engineered, and in Jabari Mansa's case, The absence of records speaks louder than ink ever could. History did not forget him by mistake. It was instructed to. Even in chains, Jabari Mansa was never truly powerless. Influence does not always announce itself through rebellion or violence. Sometimes it moves quietly, shaping minds, stabilizing spirits, and planting ideas that outlive the body. Accounts passed down through oral history describe Jabari as someone other enslaved people sought out for guidance, conflict resolution, and understanding the intentions of their captors. That alone marked him as dangerous in the eyes of slaveholders. Unlike overseers who ruled through fear, Jabari's influence came through calm authority and knowledge. He understood systems, how power functioned, how rules could bend, and how patience could outlast brutality. Enslaved people who interacted with him reportedly became more disciplined, more unified, and harder to psychologically break. Unity was the one thing slave systems feared most, and Jabari represented a quiet center of it. There are also indications that plantation owners benefited from his presence while simultaneously fearing it. Order improved, disputes lessened, productivity increased, yet his name never rose in records. This contradiction suggests exploitation without recognition, using his leadership while ensuring he was never acknowledged as a leader. His influence was tolerated only as long as it remained unofficial and invisible. Jabari Mansa's true power was not in open defiance, but in survival with dignity. He influenced people without permission, shaped communities without titles, and left a legacy without ink. In a system designed to erase humanity, his influence proved that control could never be absolute. The deeper historians and storytellers look into Jabari Mansa's background, the more his life seems connected to the great pre-colonial African empires that thrived long before European contact. Empires like Mali, Songhai, and Ghana were not primitive societies. They were centers of governance, education, astronomy, law, and global trade. To be associated with a title like Mansa meant immersion in these advanced systems from an early age. These empires valued literacy, mathematics, diplomacy, and oral record keeping. Royal families and high officials were trained to memorize histories, negotiate treaties, manage resources, and lead diverse populations. The composure, strategic thinking, and deep cultural awareness attributed to Jabari align closely with this tradition. He did not behave like someone discovering leadership for the first time. He behaved like someone remembering it. This connection is precisely what made such individuals dangerous in the New World. The slave system depended on the myth that Africans came from chaos and inferiority. A man shaped by empire shattered that illusion. A single individual carrying imperial knowledge could challenge the psychological foundation of slavery by proving, simply by existing, that greatness had been stolen, not created. If Jabari Mansa truly carried the intellectual and cultural inheritance of pre-colonial Africa, then his enslavement represents more than personal tragedy. It marks the violent relocation of empire-level knowledge into bondage. America did not just enslave labor. It captured civilizations, then buried the evidence so the truth would never rise again. Jabari Mansa's story is considered forbidden, not because it lacks evidence, but because of what that evidence threatens to reveal. History is often less about what happened and more about what those in power allow to be remembered. Acknowledging Jabari Mansa forces a dangerous question. What if the people enslaved in America included kings, strategists, scholars, and heirs to empires? That single realization collapses the carefully built narrative of superiority that justified slavery in the first place. Stories like his were actively discouraged, dismissed, or labeled as myth. Anything that suggested Africans arrived in America with advanced political systems, economic knowledge, or royal bloodlines was pushed outside academic acceptance. It was safer to teach that enslaved people had no past worth preserving. Jabari Mansa's existence directly contradicts that lie, which is why his story survived only in fragments and whispers rather than textbooks. There is also fear in what his story implies about American foundations. If men like Jabari were silenced, exploited, and erased, then America's growth was not only built on forced labor, but on stolen leadership and suppressed genius. That truth is uncomfortable, and forbidden stories are often the ones that expose moral debts history has never paid. Jabari Mansa is forbidden because remembering him restores stolen dignity, and systems built on erasure cannot survive full remembrance. Jabari Mansa's story survives largely because of oral history, not written records, and that distinction matters. In many African societies, history was never meant to live only on paper. It was carried through elders, griots, family lines, and collective memory. Oral history preserved lineage, values, and truth in ways that colonial record keeping never intended to respect. When written documents were destroyed, altered, or never created, oral memory became the last defense against total erasure. Written history in America was controlled by slaveholders, institutions, and later academics who decided what counted as credible. Enslaved people rarely had access to literacy, and when they did, their voices were often dismissed. Oral accounts of figures like Jabari Mansa were labeled as legend, exaggeration, or folklore, not because they were false, but because they came from the wrong mouths. Power decided credibility. What makes oral history powerful is consistency. Across generations, separate communities repeated similar descriptions. A man of calm authority, royal bearing, deep knowledge, and quiet leadership. These patterns are not accidental. Oral history does not preserve exact dates. It preserves meaning, and meaning is often what written history tries hardest to suppress. In the case of Jabari Mansa, oral history is not a weakness. It is evidence of resistance. It proves that even when ink was denied, memory fought back. Written history may have erased his name, but oral history refused to let him disappear. Jabari Mansa's life was defined not by overt acts of rebellion, but by the quiet resistance that enslaved people often relied upon to survive under brutal systems. Unlike large-scale uprisings that could be easily documented and crushed, his form of defiance was subtle, intellectual, and strategic. It manifested in how he conducted himself, how he guided others, and how he preserved knowledge that slaveholders wanted buried. In a world where any sign of leadership could provoke punishment or death, these acts were powerful forms of rebellion. His intelligence set him apart. He could read situations, anticipate threats, and influence outcomes without drawing attention. Plantation records may never acknowledge it, but oral accounts suggest that he mediated disputes, provided guidance, and subtly shifted power dynamics in ways that benefited the enslaved community. By maintaining composure under oppression, he proved that control over the mind could be as threatening as control over the body. This quiet rebellion extended to preserving identity. By retaining his name, carrying knowledge of African empires, and teaching others through example, Jabari resisted the total erasure that slavery demanded. Every story told about him, every lesson passed to the next generation, became a defiance of the narrative that enslaved Africans were powerless, uneducated, or without history. Jabari Mansa's resistance shows that rebellion is not always loud. Sometimes the most dangerous insurgents are those who survive, think, and influence others while the world believes they are broken. His legacy is a testament to the unspoken power of intellect, leadership, and moral courage in the face of oppression. The erasure of Jabari Mansa's story was not accidental, it served a purpose. American history, particularly the narrative around slavery, relied heavily on the belief that enslaved Africans were passive, uneducated, and incapable of leadership. By silencing individuals like Jabari, the system could justify oppression, exploit labor, and maintain social hierarchies without questioning the morality or legality of the institution. His absence from official records allowed generations to grow up with an incomplete, sanitized version of history. In practical terms, the nation benefited from his knowledge and leadership without granting him recognition. Plantation owners and colonial systems may have relied on his organizational skills, his calm authority, or his ability to resolve disputes among the enslaved, all while ensuring he remained invisible in the written record. This way, society extracted the benefits of his intellect while erasing the man himself, turning a king into a property number. Even after slavery ended, the legacy of erasure continued. Schools, textbooks, and public narratives excluded stories like Jabari's to maintain a linear, convenient version of American history. By keeping his story forbidden, the system preserved myths about the supposed simplicity and inferiority of enslaved people. In other words, America's educational and cultural framework was built on the deliberate silence of extraordinary individuals like Jabari Mansa. Understanding this silence is crucial. It exposes not just injustice, but intentional historical manipulation. The nation prospered in part because it erased knowledge and greatness that it could not control, and Jabari Mansa stands as a symbol of what was stolen in the process. Jabari Mansa's true legacy is not measured in dates or documents. It is measured in survival, influence, and memory. Despite the chains, suppression, and deliberate erasure, the traces of his life endured through oral histories, fragmented records, and cultural memory. His story challenges the way history remembers, forcing us to ask what else has been silenced, and how many lives shape the world without recognition. Even in captivity, Jabari left a mark. He preserved knowledge of African empires, maintained leadership among enslaved communities, and subtly resisted the systems designed to crush him. That influence rippled outward, shaping the resilience, unity, and intelligence of those around him. While history tried to present enslaved people as powerless, his life proved the opposite. That greatness could not be fully contained, and that intellect and character survive even in the harshest oppression. The erasure of his story also serves as a cautionary lesson. By silencing figures like Jabari, societies attempt to control not only bodies but narratives, shaping collective memory to maintain power. But legacy is not so easily destroyed. The revival of his story today honors those silenced, restoring dignity to a man whose life was extraordinary and whose experiences speak to the untold richness of African heritage. Jabari Mansa's legacy reminds us that history is never complete without truth. By piecing together fragments of forbidden stories, we reclaim the lives, knowledge, and leadership that systems tried to erase. His memory endures as a testament to courage, intelligence, and the unbroken spirit of those who refused to vanish from history, even when history tried to forget them.